There is a rubber mask sitting on a metal tray in an operating room right now. It is soft and slightly translucent and shaped to fit over a nose and a mouth. It smells faintly of nothing. In a few minutes it will be lowered onto someone's face, and that person will be asked to count backward from 10. They will not reach 7. Somewhere between the number 10 and the number 7, that person will stop existing. Not their body. Their body will lie there, warm, breathing, monitored, its heart keeping perfect time. But the thing that was looking out from behind their eyes, the thing that was hearing the room and feeling the cold table and quietly dreading the whole procedure, that thing will simply go out. Like a light. And this is the part I find almost impossible to sit with. Nobody in that room, not the anesthesiologist, not the surgeon, not any scientist alive, can fully tell you where it went. We have been using this mask in one form or another for about 175 years. We use it millions of times a year. We're extraordinarily good at it, and we still cannot explain in physical terms what actually happens to your experience of being alive when the gas takes hold. We can describe the molecules, we can map the brain regions that go quiet, but the experience itself, the fact that there was someone home and then there was no one, slips right through every instrument we own. My mind snags on that fact and will not let go. Of all the things science has cracked open, from the inside of an atom to the first second after the Big Bang, the one thing sitting closest to us, the one thing you are using right now to read this sentence, is the thing we understand least. So tonight I want to sit with that mask a little while, because it points at a possibility much larger than any operating room, and the possibility is not the one you think it is. The question people usually ask when they lie awake and look up is simple. Are we alone? Is there anybody else out there? It feels like the biggest question there is, and it splits very cleanly into two answers people argue about endlessly. On one side, the pessimists. Earth is a fluke. The conditions here were so specific, so improbably tuned, that life almost certainly happened once, here, and nowhere else that matters. A dead universe with one accidental candle burning in it. That is the rare Earth view, and it has a certain cold logic to it. On the other side, the optimists. Look at the sheer numbers. This one galaxy holds several 100 billion stars, and beyond it wait several 100 billion more galaxies, planets outnumbering the grains of sand on every beach on Earth. With odds like that, life must be everywhere. It would be almost arrogant to think otherwise. The universe should be humming with it. And people plant their flags on one side or the other, and they argue, and it feels like those are the only two doors in the room. Here is where most people get this wrong. They imagine those two doors are the whole building. Life is rare, or life is common. Pick one. But there is a third door, quieter, off to the side, and it is the one we are walking through tonight. And the third door does something strange. It agrees with the optimists on the first point and still arrives somewhere far lonelier than the pessimists ever did. Because the third door says this: life might be common, genuinely common. Bacteria in the black oceans under a dozen icy moons, microbes in the brine beneath the Martian surface, chemistry doing its patient thing on a billion worlds we will never name. All of that might be true, and it would not solve the loneliness at all. Because life was never the hard part. Life is chemistry, and chemistry is stubborn, and chemistry is patient. The hard part, the part that might have happened almost nowhere, the part that might have happened exactly once in the entire reachable universe, is the thing behind the mask. Experience, awareness, a point of view. The fact that somewhere, inside some arrangement of matter, the lights are actually on and someone is actually home. Let me put the distinction as plainly as I can, because everything tonight rides on it, and it is a distinction most people never think to make. There is a difference between a thing that lives and a thing that experiences. A bacterium lives. It takes in energy, it grows, it copies itself, it responds to its surroundings. By every biological measure, it is alive. But almost nobody thinks there is anyone in there. Nobody thinks it is like something to be a bacterium, that the bacterium feels the warmth of the vent or dreads the cold or notices anything at all. It is a tiny, beautiful, mindless machine. And here is the thing. For the first 3 billion years of life on this planet, that was the whole show. The entire biosphere was machinery, alive, everywhere, and experiencing nothing. Life without a single witness to itself. So when we ask whether we are alone, we are really asking two completely separate questions that usually get tangled into one. The first is there life out there? The second is there anyone out there for whom that life is like something? Anyone who experiences their own existence? Anyone home? And people talk as though answering the first answers the second. It does not. You could fill every ocean on every world with thriving, complicated, metabolizing life. And if none of it ever crosses the line into experience, then in the way that actually matters, the way that would end our loneliness, the universe would still be as empty as a room full of running machines with no one in it. Life is common, maybe. Witnesses might be almost non-existent. That gap between the living and the experiencing is the whole of tonight. That is the possibility we're walking into. Not that the universe is empty of life. That the universe might be full of life and almost entirely empty of minds. A cosmos crowded with biology and silent of experience. Oceans of it, teeming, metabolizing, reproducing, and no one anywhere feeling a single second of it. And if that is true, then the mask on the tray is not a medical curiosity. It is a doorway into the rarest event in the history of everything. Because you have it. Right now, the thing the universe almost never makes. And we're going to spend tonight trying to understand just how rare it might be, and what it means that you are one of the very few places it ever happened. I want to be careful with you tonight, because this is territory where it is very easy to be dishonest, and I would rather not be. Almost nothing I am going to tell you is settled. There are brilliant people who would take the exact same facts and arrange them into the opposite conclusion, and I am going to try to show you their arrangement too, fairly, not as a straw man. Because the truth is that we are standing at the edge of what anyone knows, and at that edge, the honest thing to do is not to hand you a verdict. It is to hold the uncertainty up to the light and turn it slowly, so you can see all its faces. That is what this is. Not a lecture with an answer at the end. A long, quiet turning over of a question that might be the most important one there is, and that nobody, anywhere, can currently close. So let me say plainly what the third door costs before we walk through it, because it is worth naming. If life is rare, then we are precious and lonely, and that is a clean, sad story. If life is common and minds are common, then the universe is full of company we simply have not reached yet, and that is a hopeful story. But the third door is neither clean nor hopeful. It says the universe might be generous with life and miserly with experience, that it might hand out biology like water and awareness like almost nothing at all, and it leaves you holding the strange, heavy fact that the thing you're doing right now, this, noticing, being here, feeling something as the words go by, might be the scarcest thing that exists. Not scarce like gold. Scarce like a single event that has happened only a handful of times in all of space and all of time. That is the door. Let us walk through it slowly. Let me start where the search actually is. Because right now, all over the world, some of the smartest people alive are hunting for life beyond Earth, and almost none of them are hunting for what I just described. Think about what we already know can survive. Down at the bottom of the ocean, in places sunlight has never once reached, there are cracks in the seafloor where water comes boiling up out of the rock at temperatures that would cook you instantly. Hundreds of degrees Fahrenheit, pitch black, crushing pressure. And things live there. Not just survive there, thrive there. Whole ecosystems clustered around those vents, feeding on the chemistry of the Earth itself instead of the light of the sun. We call the organisms that love these impossible places extremophiles, which is a polite scientific word for the fact that life apparently does not care how hostile you make the room. We have found life frozen inside Antarctic ice. We have found it in pools so acidic they would dissolve metal. We have found it living happily inside nuclear reactors, in radiation that would shred any of us in minutes. Everywhere we have looked on this planet, into every hellish corner we assumed was sterile, we have found something already living there, already at home. I want you to really sit with what that pattern means, because it is easy to skim past. For a long time, the working assumption was that life is delicate, that it needs mild temperatures, gentle chemistry, a comfortable little Goldilocks zone, and that outside those narrow bands nothing survives. And every single decade of exploration has quietly demolished that assumption. We keep drawing a line and saying nothing can live past here, and then we look past the line and there is something living, thriving, apparently content, feeding on heat or acid or poison, treating conditions that would kill us instantly as simply home. The organisms do not seem to think of themselves as extreme at all. They are just living where they live. It is only extreme from our point of view, from inside the narrow comfort of a warm-blooded animal that would die in any of those places in seconds. And that changes the whole tone of the question. If life were fragile, you could imagine the universe mostly sterile, with a few lucky worlds threading a very fine needle. But life here is not fragile. It is ferocious. It is opportunistic. It grabs any energy gradient it can find, and it builds an ecosystem on it. And if that is what life is really like, if it is that hungry and that persistent, then the barren picture of the universe starts to look wrong. Not because we have found aliens, we have not, but because the one example we have, our own biosphere, behaves like something that would take root anywhere it possibly could. And here is what that tells us. The basic recipe for life, the chemistry of it, is tough. It is adaptable. It grabs on hard and it does not let go. And that toughness has quietly reshaped how scientists think about the rest of the solar system. Because if life is this stubborn here, maybe the places we wrote off as dead are not dead at all. Look at a small moon of Saturn called Enceladus. It is a tiny world wrapped in ice, so far from the sun it should be a frozen dead rock. But it is not. Cracks near its south pole are constantly spraying enormous plumes of material out into space, geysers of it, tall enough to be seen from a passing spacecraft. And when we flew a probe through those plumes and tasted what was coming out, the results were staggering. Water, salt, ammonia, methane, organic compounds, the carbon building blocks that everything living is made from, and molecular hydrogen, which is the real praise because on Earth, molecular hydrogen coming up from the seafloor is food. It is exactly what those deep vent ecosystems eat. So under all that ice on Enceladus, there is an ocean. A real, liquid, salty ocean. And on the floor of that ocean, there may be hydrothermal vents doing the same patient chemistry that our own deep vents have been doing for billions of years. Which means Enceladus has, as best we can tell from 100 miles away, an environment that on Earth would be absolutely crawling with life. The same story is playing out at a moon of Jupiter called Europa, which hides an ocean under its ice that may hold more liquid water than every ocean on Earth combined. NASA scientists have said, in careful, measured language, that life signs could plausibly survive near the surfaces of both of these worlds, given what we currently understand about them. That is a remarkable sentence when you sit with it. We are no longer asking whether these oceans exist. We are asking what might be swimming in them. Picture for a moment what it would actually take to find out at Europa. You would send a probe, and it would have to get through the ice, which is not a thin skin but a shell several miles thick in places. So the machine would land, and it would begin to melt or drill its way down slowly for a very long time, through miles of ancient ice that has never once seen sunlight. And then, finally, it would break through the bottom of that shell and drop into a black ocean. An ocean with no light in it, no surface it could see, no floor it could see, nothing but cold water in every direction and the faint pressure of the ice ceiling far above. And it would sit there in that darkness and listen, not for a voice, not for a signal, but for the faint chemical hum of metabolism, for the trace signature of something eating. That is the whole search. a machine alone in a lightless sea sniffing the water for a sign that anything at all is alive down there with it. And here is a question that matters more than it might first appear. If we do find something living in one of these oceans, the very next question a scientist would ask is whether it is related to us. Because there are two very different ways that could go. It might share our biochemistry, the same basic molecular alphabet, which would suggest that maybe life spread between worlds long ago, carried on debris knocked off one planet and landing on another, so that we and the aliens are distant cousins from a single origin. Or, far more interesting, it might be built on completely different chemistry, a genuinely independent origin of life, a second genesis. And if we ever found that, a life that started from scratch, separately, in the same solar system, it would nearly double our confidence that life gets going easily, wherever conditions allow. It would be the strongest possible evidence that the first half of our question, the origin of life, is not hard at all. Two separate origins in one solar system would mean it must be happening constantly across the galaxy. There is a mission that people have sketched out for Enceladus, a beautiful piece of engineering on paper. You send a spacecraft that first orbits the moon, flying again and again through those plumes, catching the spray, and then it lands, right in the fallout zone, where the geyser material rains gently back down onto the surface, and it scoops up that fresh snow and tests it directly. And the numbers people have run are almost tender in their precision. Over about 100 days of collecting, you might gather somewhere between 100,000 and 100 million cells worth of material, if the ocean below has anything living in it at all. You would need only about 100,000 cells in a single teaspoon of sample to detect them. Picture that. Picture a machine, 1 billion miles from home, sitting in the fresh fallen snow of an alien geyser, running a test to see if the universe made life somewhere other than here, and picture the answer coming back, yes. Sit with those numbers for a moment, because they are quietly astonishing. We are talking about a spacecraft flying repeatedly through a plume of ice, erupting from a moon most people have never heard of, catching a spray so faint that 100 days of patient collecting might net it only a teaspoon's worth of the cells it is hunting for. That is how thin the evidence would be. And yet it might be enough. A single teaspoon of alien snow, caught out of a geyser in the dark, could carry the answer to a question humans have asked for as long as there have been humans to ask it. That is the delicate, almost unbearable precision of the search. The margin between finding out we're not alone in the biological sense and never knowing at all might come down to a few grains of frozen spray. It would be the most important discovery in human history. It would change everything, and it would not touch the loneliness at all. Because here is the thing nobody says loudly enough. Every single one of these missions, every probe, every telescope, every teaspoon of alien snow is designed to detect one thing: metabolism, chemistry, the signature of things that eat and grow and copy themselves. That is the entire budget. That is where all the effort goes, and metabolism is exactly the easy half of the question. We are pouring the resources of civilizations into confirming that the universe can do the one thing we already suspected it does easily. Not one of these instruments can detect a mind. Not one of them can tell you whether anything in that alien ocean ever feels the cold, or notices the dark, or experiences a single second of its own existence. There is no test for that. There is no probe for that. The whole magnificent search is aimed at the door we were always going to be able to open, and it walks right past the one that might be locked forever. Imagine that sealed sample vial coming back from Enceladus. A few teaspoons of plume ice, melted into water in a lab on Earth, chemically rich, maybe swimming with alien cells, and structurally, permanently, completely incapable of ever telling you whether any of it felt anything at all. So here is the strange gift the next few decades might hand us. We may be about to prove the universe is full of life, and prove, in the very same span of years, that it is nearly empty of minds. And you might think finding microbes on 3 separate moons in our own backyard would make you feel less alone. It might do the opposite. Because it would rule out the comforting story. It would take away the excuse. It would mean the raw material for company was sitting right next door the whole time, and the universe, having all that material to work with, still, overwhelmingly, chose silence over awareness. That is the possibility, not a barren cosmos, a cosmos that had every chance and stayed dark anyway. Think about that for a second. Not empty, full and still dark. So the real question is not whether life is hard. The real question is whether the jump from life to a mind is hard, and to understand how hard that jump might be, we have to look at how it happened here. Because it happened here exactly once, and the story of that once is stranger than almost anyone realizes. Back in the early 1980s, a physicist named Brandon Carter asked a question that most people had never thought to ask. He noticed something suspicious about the timing of our own existence. Life needs a star, and stars do not last forever. The sun gives Earth a window of habitability, a span of time when things can live here. And Carter noticed that the time it took for intelligent life to actually appear on Earth was a huge fraction of that entire window. Not a small early sliver, most of it. We arrived, in cosmic terms, right up against the deadline. And Carter realized that this pattern, if you take it seriously, tells you something. It suggests that getting from a dead planet to a thinking creature required passing through a series of steps, each one of which was intrinsically, brutally improbable. He called them hard steps, not steps that take a long time because they are complicated, steps that take a long time because they are so unlikely that you basically have to wait and wait and wait, rolling the dice over and over across hundreds of millions of years until one impossibly lucky roll finally comes up. People have argued about how many hard steps there were and which ones they were, but the 5 that come up most often are these: the origin of life itself, chemistry first becoming a living thing, then the invention of photosynthesis, life learning to eat sunlight and, as a side effect, filling the air with oxygen, then something called eukaryogenesis, which we will get to, and which might be the strangest and most important of all, then the arrival of complex many-celled animals, and finally the appearance of a creature like us, something that could look up and ask the question in the first place. And here is a detail that gives a lot of people chills. When you space those 5 steps out across Earth's history, they land, on average, about 840 million years apart, almost evenly. And some researchers look at that eerie, regular spacing and see the fingerprint of exactly what Carter described. Rare, randomly timed transitions, events so unlikely that the waiting time between them stretches into an even ghostly rhythm, like the ticking of a very slow and very strange clock. Let me pause on one of those steps in particular, because it is the kind of thing that sounds like a footnote and is actually enormous. Photosynthesis. Life learning to eat sunlight. It sounds gentle, almost pastoral, but its consequence was one of the most violent transformations in the history of the planet. Because the version of photosynthesis that eventually dominated pumps out oxygen as a waste product, and oxygen, to the life that existed back then, was poison. For an enormous span of Earth's history, there was almost no free oxygen in the air at all. Then this new trick appeared, and slowly, over a vast stretch of time, it began flooding the atmosphere with a gas that was lethal to most of the life already here. It reshaped the sky. It rusted the oceans. Some people call it the first great pollution event, or the first great extinction, and it was caused by nothing more sinister than tiny cells figuring out how to catch light. But here is why that matters for you specifically. Animals need oxygen. Big, active, energy-hungry bodies with nervous systems need a lot of it. And that oxygen was simply not available for roughly the first half of Earth's history. More than half. For something like the first 52% of this planet's existence. The air did not have enough oxygen to support anything like an animal. And even after oxygen started building up, the reliably high levels that a creature like us actually depends on were not firmly in place until something like 400 to 420 million years ago. Which means, if you do the arithmetic, that only the final 9% or so of Earth's entire history has had an atmosphere suitable for human-like life. 9%. The stage was not even ready for us for 91% of the time the theatre has been open. Now, let me show you the hardest step. Because to me, it is the one that changes everything, and it lives inside your own body right now. Life appeared on Earth fast, shockingly fast. Within a few 100 million years of the planet cooling enough to have oceans, something living was already here. We have solid fossil evidence of life at least 3.5 billion years ago, and hints that push it earlier. So the origin of life, the thing everyone assumes is the miracle, apparently was not much of a bottleneck at all. It happened almost as soon as it could. And then, nothing. For about 2 billion years, nearly half the entire age of the Earth, life did essentially nothing new. It stayed small, it stayed simple. Single cells and only single cells, mats of them, bacteria and their relatives, spreading across a warm and empty world. 2 billion years of pond scum. 2 billion years of an ocean the colour of dishwater with no eyes anywhere to see the colour, and no nervous system anywhere to register that anything was happening at all. The planet was alive, and the planet was blank. Nobody home, for an unimaginably long time. What broke the stalemate was one of the weirdest events in the history of life, and to understand why it mattered, you have to understand a problem about energy. A biochemist named Nick Lane has spent his career arguing that the reason bacteria stayed small for 2 billion years was not laziness. It was physics. A bacterium generates its energy across its outer membrane, its surface, and if you try to scale a bacterium up, make it bigger, more complex, give it more genes to run a more interesting life, you hit a wall. The math is unforgiving. A bacterium blown up to the size and complexity of a complex cell would have something like 10,000 times less energy available per gene to actually run itself. 10,000 times. That is the difference between a candle and a power plant. Complexity was not forbidden by chemistry. It was forbidden by the electricity bill. So how did anything ever get past that wall? Here is the answer, and it is genuinely bizarre. Around 2 billion years ago, one simple cell did something it was not supposed to do. It swallowed another simple cell, and instead of digesting it, or being digested, the two of them somehow started living together. The swallowed cell stayed inside, kept its own separate identity, and started producing energy for its host. Over enormous stretches of time, that captured cell became a permanent internal power station. We call it the mitochondrion. And this changed everything, because suddenly a cell did not have to generate all its energy across its own outer surface. It had these little power plants dotted throughout its insides, dozens of them, hundreds of them, each one pumping out energy from within. The electricity bill was paid. The wall came down. For the first time in 2 billion years, a cell could afford to get big and complex and expensive. Every plant, every animal, every fungus, every complex living thing that has ever existed on this planet, including you, is descended from that one merger. And this is the detail that unsettles me most. As far as anyone can tell from the evidence, this merger happened once. Exactly once. In 4.5 billion years of Earth's history, with an entire planet's worth of cells bumping into each other constantly for 2 billion years, the trick of one cell capturing another and turning it into a power station succeeded and stuck and led somewhere. Exactly one time. Every complex cell alive today traces back to that single event. There is no evidence it ever happened twice. Right now, inside the cells of your fingertip, there are mitochondria, bean-shaped little structures, still carrying their own separate scrap of DNA, a genetic signature from that ancient captured microbe, 2 billion years later, faithfully copied through an unbroken chain of ancestors straight back to the one that got swallowed. Every thought you have ever had, every feeling, every second of experience, runs on power generated by the descendants of a hostile takeover between two germs, a takeover that, by the best evidence we have, only ever worked once in the history of this world. I find that almost impossible to hold in my head, so let me try to make it real. Your brain is an extraordinarily expensive organ to run. It is a small fraction of your body's weight, and it burns something like a fifth of your body's energy, all day, every day, even while you sleep, even right now as you lie here. It is the most energy-hungry tissue you have. And all of that energy, every bit of the electrical fire that is currently letting you understand this sentence, is being generated by those tiny captured power plants, the mitochondria, working away in the dark inside your neurons. Which means that consciousness, at least the kind you have, is not free. It runs hot. It demands a colossal, constant supply of energy, and that supply only became possible because of the one merger. No merger, no energy surplus. No energy surplus, no big expensive brain. No big expensive brain, no you. The whole towering structure of your inner life rests on a single, freakish, 2 billion-year-old accident that, as far as we can tell, the universe has never once repeated on this planet. And that is what makes the mitochondrion such a strange thing to carry around. It is a fossil. You are, in a real sense, a walking museum of the single, least likely thing that ever happened here. When you feel your own heartbeat, when you notice your own breath, you are being kept alive by the many times great-grandchildren of a microbe that got eaten and refused to die 2 billion years before there was anyone around who could ever know it. It is beautiful, and it is unsettling in equal measure. The energy of your awareness is borrowed, and the loan was signed in a warm sea by 2 single cells that had no idea what they were starting. Think about what that means for the odds. If eukaryogenesis, that one merger, really is a genuine hard step, if it really is that improbable, then the jump from simple life to complex life might be one of the tightest bottlenecks in the entire universe. A planet could be soaked in bacteria for 10 billion years and never once make the leap. The oceans of Europa could be full of simple cells that will stay simple forever, because the one improbable trick that lets complexity happen might simply never fire. And this is worth dwelling on, because it reframes the whole picture of what a living universe might actually look like. We tend to imagine that if life is common, then complex life, and eventually thinking life, is just a matter of time. Give it a few billion years and simple cells will naturally climb the ladder toward complexity, toward animals, toward minds. But the 2 billion year stall on our own planet says maybe not. Maybe there is no ladder. Maybe simple life is a stable state, a dead end that a biosphere can sit in comfortably, forever, without any pressure to become anything more. Bacteria are not failed animals waiting to evolve upward. They are the most successful form of life that has ever existed, and they were doing perfectly fine for 2 billion years with no complexity at all. It took a freak accident, one cell swallowing another and not digesting it, to break them out of that stable state. And freak accidents, by definition, do not have to happen. So picture the galaxy through that lens. Picture 10,000 ocean moons, all warm under their ice, all full of simple cells, all metabolizing away happily. And picture that on nearly every one of them. That is the whole story. Simple life, forever. The oceans stay the color of dishwater. The single cells stay single, and nothing ever swallows anything else and survives it, and so complexity never ignites, and no eye ever forms, and no nervous system ever fires, and the universe stays exactly as full of biology and exactly as empty of experience as it was the day the first cell appeared. That is not an empty universe. It is a crowded one. It is just a crowded universe where nobody is home. And that, if the pessimists are right, might be the default. That might be what most living worlds actually are. Now, I told you at the start that I would be honest with you, and here is where honesty matters. Because this whole hard steps picture, this whole story of a universe strangled by improbability, was seriously challenged very recently, and the challenge deserves a fair hearing. In early 2025, a group of researchers published a reassessment of the entire hard steps model, and their argument was provocative. Maybe, they said, there are no hard steps at all. Maybe the reason these transitions look like they happened only once is not that they were astronomically improbable. Maybe it is something much more ordinary and much sneakier. Their idea goes like this. When a new kind of life first appears and succeeds, it does not leave the door open behind it. It takes over. It fills the available space. And by filling it, it makes it much harder for the same innovation to happen again independently, because the niche is already occupied. The first lineage to figure out a trick crowds out every latecomer. On top of that, billions of years of extinction have erased almost all the evidence, so even if these things did happen more than once, we would have no way to see the repeats. What looks like a once-in-a-universe miracle might just be the one survivor of many attempts, standing in a landscape where all the others were quietly deleted by time. And if they are right, the whole picture flips. Because if these steps are not intrinsically improbable, if they happen more or less reliably once a planet reaches the right conditions, then intelligent life is not vanishingly rare. It might be almost expected. A natural, rule-governed unfolding on any world that stays habitable long enough. The universe would not be a desert. It would be a garden, patiently growing minds wherever the soil is right. There is even a piece of evidence they point to that fits this hopeful reading, and it is worth being fair about because it is a good point. Remember how I said life appeared on Earth almost as soon as it possibly could, within a few 100 million years of the oceans forming. If the origin of life were a genuine hard step, one of those near impossible transitions, you would expect it to have taken a long, random, agonizing time, the dice tumbling for billions of years before they finally came upright. Instead, it happened fast, suspiciously fast. Almost as though, given liquid water and the right chemistry, life is not a lottery win at all, but something closer to a chemical reaction waiting to happen. A thing the universe does readily and quickly wherever it can. And if that is true of the origin of life, maybe it is true of the other steps too. Maybe none of them are the impossible walls we imagined. Maybe the whole hard step story is an illusion created by the fact that we only have one planet to look at. And on that one planet, each big innovation happened once, and then locked the door behind itself. I genuinely go back and forth on this. Some nights the pessimistic reading feels obviously right. The 2 billion year stall, the single merger, the late arrival, all of it screaming that minds are a fluke. Other nights the optimistic reading feels just as strong, life appearing instantly, awareness evolving twice, eyes evolving 60 times over, all of it whispering that the universe makes minds as easily as it makes crystals. And the truth, the honest truth, is that both readings are built on the same single example, and a single example cannot settle a question about probability. You cannot tell whether a coin is fair by flipping it once and getting heads. We flipped the coin once, we got us. And we have been arguing about the odds ever since with nothing but that one flip to go on. Nobody can say for sure which of these stories is true. We have one planet, one data point, and you cannot draw a curve through a single dot. Everything I am telling you tonight lives in that uncertainty. The people who say intelligence is a near miracle, and the people who say it is nearly inevitable are looking at the exact same Earth and reading it in opposite directions, and neither of them can prove the other wrong, because we have never seen a second example of anything. I want to sit in that uncertainty with you rather than pretend it away, because that is the honest place to be. And if you are the kind of person who would rather sit with a genuine open question at 3 a.m. than be handed a tidy fake answer, then you might be exactly who this channel is for. If any of this is keeping you company tonight, take a moment to subscribe and to follow along on Spotify if that is where you listen. Because there are more of us than you would think, people who actually want to lie here and turn something like this over slowly in the dark instead of being shouted at about it. That is the whole idea. Quiet company for the questions that do not have answers yet. Because here is the thing that keeps the question alive even inside the optimistic view. even if you grant the 2025 reassessment everything it asks for, even if life is common and complexity is common, there is a step those models tend not to count at all. The step from a complex nervous system to an actual experience, from a brain that processes information to a something that it is like to be that brain. The hard steps models argue about eyes and cells and oxygen. They rarely even ask whether the lights come on inside, and that step, as we'll see, might be the hardest one of all precisely because we cannot find the bottom of it. It is the one possibility the models keep walking past. But before we get there, I want to show you the clock, because whichever story is true, the timing of our own arrival is strange enough to keep you up at night on its own. The sun is getting brighter, slowly, steadily, all the time, not in a way you would ever notice in a lifetime or 1,000 lifetimes, but real and relentless, roughly 10% brighter every billion years, and that has a consequence most people never think about. The sun does not need to do anything dramatic first. Its far future as a bloated red star, large enough to reach the inner worlds, is billions of years away. That slow brightening will have cooked the Earth long before then. The extra heat will push our planet out of the comfortable zone where liquid water can exist, and it will begin to boil the oceans away into space, and here is when. Not billions of years from the sun's actual death, about 1 billion years from now. That is the real deadline for complex life on Earth. The sun will not become a red giant for another 5 to 6 billion years, but the party is over long before that, in roughly 1 billion, when the oceans start to go. So do the math on the window. Earth has been here about 4.5 billion years. It has maybe 1 billion left that could support anything complex, which means the total span of time this planet ever had, or ever will have, for complex life is something like 5 to 5.5 billion years. Not the sun's full 10 billion year lifetime, just over half of it. And into that window we arrived late, very late. It took roughly 3.5 to 4 billion years from the moment Earth formed for a creature to appear that could look up and understand any of this, which means intelligence showed up in something like the final 10 to 20% of the whole habitable window. Not early, not comfortably in the middle, near the end. There is a way of picturing this that I find hard to shake. Squeeze the entire 4.5 billion year history of the Earth into a single calendar year. January 1st is the planet forming. And on that scale, for month after month after month, there is nothing but single cells. Spring, summer, most of the fall, the whole planet is microbial slime, an ocean the colour of dishwater, no eyes, no minds, nothing that knows it is there. Complex animals do not show up until deep into December, and anatomically, modern humans, people like us, do not appear until about 11:36 on the night of December 31st, less than half an hour before midnight. Everything, every empire, every cathedral, every song, every war, every person you have ever loved, the pyramids, the moon landing, this very moment, all of it is crammed into the last handful of minutes before the year ends. On a year-long clock, the entire span of conscious human existence is a few final seconds of ticking before the lights go out. For more than 3 billion years of that year, more than half of the whole thing, the planet was awake in the biological sense and completely asleep in every sense that matters. Alive and blank. And then, right at the end, for just a few minutes, some of the matter here opened its eyes and started to notice. I said the word terrifying is in the title of tonight's story, and I have mostly kept it out of the script because I do not think fear is the right feeling here. But if there is a place for a chill, it is here. You're not living in a long, comfortable golden age of awareness on Earth, with eons of conscious life stretching out behind you and ahead of you. You're living near the tail end of the only window this planet is ever going to get. Whatever awareness you have tonight is not a permanent fixture of the cosmos. It is closer to a late arriving flare, brief and bright, in a window that is already, quietly, on a geological clock beginning to close. and that is if intelligence arrives at all. Remember, the fact that it took us almost the entire window to show up is itself a clue. If minds were easy, if they came quickly once complex life existed, you would expect them to appear early and often. Instead, we scraped in right against the deadline on a planet that got lucky enough to stay stable for 4 billion years. Plenty of worlds will not get that long. A planet that only has 3 billion years before its star turns hostile might make life, might even make complex cells, and then run out of clock before anything wakes up. The window closes with the ocean still blank, and there is a further wrinkle here, and it is a big one, because it is about luck. Consider how we specifically got here. For over 150 million years, the dominant large animals on this planet were the dinosaurs, and in all that time, in all those millions of years of large-brained, capable, successful animals, none of them built a telescope. None of them asked whether they were alone. Whatever we mean by human-style intelligence, the dinosaurs, for all their success, did not stumble into it. And then, about 66 million years ago, a rock several miles wide fell out of the sky and hit the Earth, and the impact and its aftermath wiped out the non-avian dinosaurs entirely and cleared the stage. And into that emptied world crept the small mammals that had been living in the shadows, and one branch of them, eventually very late, became us. Here is the part that unsettles me. That asteroid did not have to hit, and even the fact that it caused a mass extinction was not guaranteed. Some researchers who studied the exact spot it struck have argued that the chemistry of that particular location was crucial, that a rock of the same size hitting most other places on Earth would not have triggered the same global catastrophe. By some estimates, the odds that an impact like that would produce a mass extinction at all were only around 1 in 8, based on how much of the planet's surface had the right composition to loft enough world-darkening material into the sky. So run the tape again. Most of the time, the rock hits the ocean, or a different kind of rock, and the dinosaurs survive, and the mammals stay small in the shadows, and there is no gap for anything like us to climb into. On most versions of Earth, we never happen at all. Our whole existence may hang on a coin that came up an unlikely way once, 66 million years ago. So was the long delay before intelligence a hard step, something intrinsically improbable that any planet would struggle with, or was it just Earth-specific bad luck, a series of accidents that could have gone faster somewhere else, or never happened at all? The honest answer, again, is that we cannot tell. It might be that other worlds produce minds in half the time. It might be that other worlds never produce them because they never get their lucky asteroid, or they get an unlucky one that sterilizes everything. We are working from a sample of one, and the one we have is drenched in contingency, in coincidence, in things that only happened because 100 other things happened first in exactly the right order. There is one more timing argument, and it is subtle, and once you see it, you cannot quite unsee it. The universe is young, not in the way we usually mean, but in a deep cosmic sense. Stars will keep forming, and planets will keep forming around them, for an almost unimaginable stretch of time ahead, far longer than the roughly 14 billion years that have already passed. The universe capable of hosting life may have a total lifespan measured not in billions, but in tens of trillions of years. So picture every conscious observer who will ever exist spread across that whole vast future. We're not standing somewhere in the middle of that crowd. We're extraordinarily early. We showed up near the very beginning of the party, when almost none of the guests have arrived yet. And some thinkers argue that our early arrival is itself a clue, and a troubling one. Because if intelligence were easy, if it popped up readily wherever complex life existed, then the galaxy should already be full of older civilizations that got their start billions of years before us, and one of them, somewhere, should have spread out and become impossible to miss. The fact that we look around and see an empty, quiet sky, and the fact that we arrive so early in cosmic time fit together into an uncomfortable suggestion. Maybe the reason we do not see anyone older is that the steps to get here are so hard and so slow. that almost nothing reaches this point, and the few things that do, like us, arrive strung out and alone, early, rare, and unlikely ever to meet. Our earliness might be evidence not that we are special in a flattering way, but that the road behind us is even harder to walk than we thought. So the timing is a warning. Whatever it takes to make a mind, it seems to take a very long time, and time is exactly the thing the universe rations most cruelly. Stars burn out, windows close, and the thing behind the mask, the point of view, the someone home, may need more patient centuries than most worlds will ever be granted. But now I want to turn the whole thing around, because so far I've been building the case that minds are rare, and I owe you the strongest evidence on the other side, and that evidence is not in space at all. It is in a tide pool. The last common ancestor you share with an octopus lived more than 550 million years ago. And it was not much. It was probably something like a simple flatworm, a little crawling thing with no real brain to speak of, just a scattering of nerves. That is the last blueprint you and an octopus had in common. Everything after that, every ounce of intelligence in a human brain and every ounce of intelligence in an octopus, evolved completely separately. Two totally independent experiments on the same planet in making a mind. Two engineers who never met, handed the same rough problem, and each building a thinking thing from scratch. And what the octopus built is genuinely alien. We tend to imagine that alien intelligence, if we ever meet it, will come from across the light years, from some planet 50 light years away in the dark. But the strangest mind humans have ever encountered was never in space. It was in the ocean the whole time. Consider the architecture. Your intelligence is centralized. It lives in a command center in your skull, and your body takes orders from it. An octopus is built on a completely different principle. It has around 500 million neurons, which is a lot comparable to a dog, but the majority of them are not in its head. They are in its arms. Each arm has its own dense web of nerve cells, its own local processing, and can, to a real degree, taste and touch and decide and act on its own, without checking in with the central brain first. It is less like a single thinker with limbs, and more like a committee that happens to share a body. Some researchers have wondered, only half joking, whether an octopus is one mind or something closer to 9 semi-independent minds cooperating. And here is the thing that made me sit very still the first time I read it. If you take a severed octopus arm, an arm no longer attached to the animal at all, that arm will, for a while, keep behaving. It will reach. It will grasp. It will explore objects, curl around them, respond to touch, all on its own. Because so much of the thinking the arm does was always happening locally, in the arm itself, not sent up to a central brain and back. A piece of a creature, continuing to explore the world by itself. It is one of the eeriest facts in all of biology, and it tells you just how differently a mind can be built. And it raises a question that goes straight to the heart of tonight. A question we do not know how to answer even for a creature living right here in our own oceans. When an octopus reaches out with an arm, is there one experience of reaching, unified, felt by a single self the way you feel your own hand move? Or is there something stranger going on, the arm having its own local something, its own little pocket of processing that the central brain only loosely oversees? Does the octopus feel its 8 arms the way you feel your 2, as clearly its own? Or is it more like a loose federation, a central self surrounded by 8 semi-independent explorers, each doing a portion of the living? We do not know. We cannot know from the outside. And that uncertainty is instructive, because it means we cannot even confidently count the number of experiences inside a single animal we can hold in our hands. If unity of experience is that slippery in an octopus, and as we will see, that slippery in a human brain that has been surgically divided, then we should be very humble about our confidence that we know what a mind is, or how to recognize one, anywhere. An octopus can watch another octopus solve a puzzle and then copy the solution, skipping the trial and error entirely, which is a sophisticated kind of learning. They use tools. There are octopuses that gather up empty coconut shell halves, carry them awkwardly across the seafloor, and reassemble them later into a portable shelter, a little armoured fort they built and packed and brought with them. They change the colour and texture of their entire skin in less than a second to vanish against a rock, a display so fast and so complicated that some scientists suspect the octopus's own central brain may not even be fully aware of doing it in real time, because so much of the control is farmed out to the skin and the arms. I keep circling back to how genuinely strange it is to share a planet with something like this. When people picture meeting an alien mind, they picture something arriving in a ship, something from across the light years, and part of the thrill and the terror is the idea of an intelligence assembled on a different world by a completely different evolutionary history. But we already have that. It is not 50 light years away in the cold dark. It is 40 feet away, in a tide pool, in warm, shallow water you could wade into. A mind built on a different blueprint, that solves problems and plays and gets bored and, by every reasonable measure, has some kind of rich inner life, and it was assembled from a starting point we shared over 500 million years ago, and then diverged from completely. When a person and an octopus look at each other through the glass of a tank, and something passes between them, that is very possibly the closest thing to first contact that has ever happened. And it happened in an aquarium, quietly, without anyone calling it that. And that asymmetry does something to the loneliness question, because it cuts both ways at once. On the one hand, it is deeply comforting. It says that awareness is not some fragile one-off, that it can be built more than one way, that the recipe is flexible. On the other hand, there is the strange sadness of it. Here is a mind right here that we can almost, but not quite, reach. We can watch it. We can study it. We cannot ask it what its life is like from the inside, and it cannot tell us, and even if it could, it might be so different from ours that the answer would not translate. We are surrounded, on our own planet, by other kinds of experience we can never quite enter. And if we cannot fully cross the gap to a creature that evolved in the same ocean, what hope would we have of ever truly understanding a mind from another star? Now, why does any of this matter for our question tonight? Here is why. There is a marker some researchers use as a rough proxy for the very first glimmer of consciousness, a kind of learning called unlimited associative learning, the ability to link almost any stimulus to almost any other, and build an open-ended web of associations about the world. And that capacity appears to have evolved independently at least twice, once in animals like us, the vertebrates, and once entirely separately in the octopuses and their cousins, the squid and the cuttlefish, twice, on one planet, from a shared ancestor that had almost nothing. Think about how much that single fact could mean, and how little it might mean, all at the same time. And that is the strongest argument I know, that consciousness might not be rare at all. Because if awareness can assemble itself two separate times, from two wildly different starting points, on the same little world, then maybe it is not a fluke, maybe it is something like an attractor, a destination that complex nervous systems tend to drift toward whenever they get the chance, the way water finds the lowest point. Maybe wherever life gets rich enough and complex enough, minds are simply what happens next, again and again, a natural and near inevitable flowering. Look at eyes, for another example. The ability to form an image, to see, did not evolve once and get inherited by everyone. Scientists estimate that light-sensing organs, the precursors to eyes, evolved independently somewhere between 40 and 65 separate times across different lineages of life. 40 to 65 separate inventions of the eye. When nature wants to see, it apparently finds a way over and over, from scratch, because seeing is so useful that the pressure toward it is relentless. And there is a lovely idea, sometimes called the light switch hypothesis, that the near-simultaneous arrival of real image-forming eyes across many different animal groups, around 540 million years ago, helped trigger the Cambrian explosion, that sudden riotous burst when animal life diversified into 1,000 strange body plans in a geological eye blink. Some researchers go further. They argue that the Cambrian, that first great flowering of complex animals with real eyes and real nervous systems, might be the first moment in the fossil record where you can point and say, there, something might have started to experience the world. Not thinking, not reasoning, nothing like us. Just the faintest first flicker of it being like something to be alive. The first minimal consciousness. That is a minority view, contested and debated, not a settled fact. But it plants the origin of experience itself right there in the rock, 500 million years ago, in the eyes of the first animals that could see. I find that image strangely moving, so let me linger on it. Picture the ocean just before the Cambrian. 3 billion years of life, and not one eye anywhere. The world exists, but nothing sees it. The light comes down through the water and falls on the seafloor, and nothing, anywhere, registers that there is light at all. It is a world with no images in it, no picture of itself, because there is no one to form the picture. And then, over some span of time that in the fossil record looks almost sudden, eyes appear, real eyes, forming real images, and for the very first time in the history of the planet, the world is being seen. Somewhere, in some early animal, light is being turned into a picture, and maybe, just maybe, there is the faintest flicker of someone there to whom the picture appears. If those researchers are right, that is the moment the universe, on this one small planet, opened its first eye and looked. After 3 billion years of a world with no witness, a witness. It is one of the candidates for the single most important event that ever happened here, and it left almost no trace, just some lenses turned to stone, 500 million years old, that once pointed out at a scene nobody had ever seen before. And notice what all these examples share: the mitochondria, the 2 independent origins of learning, the dozens of separate inventions of the eye. They are attempts to read a single data point in 2 opposite ways. When something happens over and over independently, like eyes, we say it is easy, convergent, nearly inevitable. When something happens exactly once, like the mitochondrial merger, we say it is a fluke, a near impossible bottleneck. But experience, consciousness itself, is the one thing where we genuinely cannot tell which category it falls into. It might be like the eye, arising again and again wherever nervous systems get complex enough, in which case the universe could be full of witnesses. Or it might be like the merger, a one-time freak that happened here and essentially nowhere else, in which case the universe is a vast dark theatre, with the show playing to an empty house, save for one occupied seat. Same evidence. 2 readings. And the whole weight of the loneliness question hangs on which one is true. So which is it? Does the octopus prove minds are common, a robust and repeatable thing the universe makes easily? Or is it a trap? Because here is the counter-argument, and it is a good one. Yes, consciousness evolved twice on Earth. But those are 2 data points from the same planet. The same chemistry, the same gravity, the same billions of years, the same one lucky world that already cleared every hard step. 2 convergences on one blessed Earth might tell you nothing whatsoever about 1 trillion other worlds where the conditions were never right in the first place. It might just mean that once you have an Earth, minds come easily. And the whole question was always whether you get an Earth at all. You genuinely cannot tell yet which story you are living inside. The octopus is either the best evidence that the universe is full of minds, or it is a beautiful coincidence that fooled us into thinking the sample was bigger than one. The same fact points both ways, and where it points depends entirely on a number we do not have. And this brings us to the deepest part of the whole night, the part that sits right under everything else. Because I have been talking about consciousness this whole time as though we know what it is. We do not. We really, genuinely do not. And to see how strange the situation is, we have to go back to that mask on the tray. In 1995, a philosopher named David Chalmers gave the problem its modern name. He separated the questions about the mind into two kinds. There are what he called the easy problems, and do not be fooled by the word easy because these are enormously difficult scientific questions. Questions about how the brain stores a memory, how it directs attention, how it processes what the eyes send it, how it produces behaviour. They are called easy only in the sense that we can see how, in principle, they might be solved. They are questions about mechanism, and mechanism is the kind of thing science is built to crack. Give it enough time and enough scanners and we will map every circuit. And then there is the hard problem. The hard problem asks a different kind of question entirely. Why is any of that accompanied by an experience? Why is there something it is like to be you? When light hits your eye and your brain processes it, why is there also a felt seeing of red? An actual private experience of the colour, glowing there for an audience of one. In principle, all that information processing could happen in the dark. A system could take in light, identify the wavelength, react appropriately, and there could be nobody home to see anything. No inner glow, no experience, just machinery, doing its job in the dark. Chalmers made this vivid with a thought experiment that has haunted the field ever since. Imagine a being physically identical to you, atom for atom. It has the same brain, the same neurons firing in the same patterns. It says all the same things you say. If you pinch it, it says ouch and pulls away. From the outside, it is you in every measurable respect. But there is no one inside, no experience, no felt anything. The lights are off. It processes and reacts and speaks, all in the dark. A perfect performance of a person with nobody home to give the performance to. He called this a philosophical zombie. And his unsettling point was this: if you can even coherently imagine such a thing, if a being that behaves exactly like a conscious person but has no inner experience is not a contradiction in terms, then experience is not just the same thing as the physical processing. Something extra is going on when the lights come on. Something a complete physical map of the brain would not capture. And nobody, in the 30 years since, has been able to say what that something is. There is a related puzzle here that is worth a short detour, because it shows how slippery our own unity of experience really is. For a long time, there was a striking claim floating around about patients who had undergone a particular kind of surgery, where the thick bundle of fibres connecting the two halves of the brain is cut, usually to control severe seizures. And in certain careful experiments, these split-brain patients seemed to behave as though there were two separate centres of awareness inside a single skull, each half of the brain apparently knowing things the other half did not, sometimes even the two hands seeming to disagree with each other. It led to a genuinely disturbing idea that consciousness could be divided, that you could take one person and, with a knife, produce two minds sharing one head. It is a claim you still hear repeated as though it were settled fact. But here is where honesty matters again, because the picture has shifted. More recent research, including work published quite recently, has challenged that two minds interpretation directly. Some studies now find that even split-brain patients, and even patients with only minimal remaining connections between the hemispheres, still appear to have a single, unified consciousness, one perceiver, not two, able to respond to information across the whole visual field as one integrated self. So the dramatic old framing, two minds in one skull, is not something you should take as current consensus. I mention it partly to be accurate and partly because it makes a deeper point. We do not even have a settled answer to how many conscious beings are sitting inside a single divided human brain. We cannot count the minds in one skull with confidence, and this is the tool we're trying to use to reason about how many minds exist in 100 billion galaxies. While we are being careful, let me clear one thing off the table, because it comes up whenever people talk about consciousness and physics. You will sometimes hear a dramatic-sounding claim that consciousness is what collapses the quantum wave function, that the universe only becomes definite when a mind observes it, that awareness is somehow woven into the deepest machinery of reality in that specific way. I want to be straight with you. That is a fringe interpretation, not something most physicists accept, and there is no good evidence for it. It exists, people argue about it, and we're going to leave it right there because it is not the kind of thing you should fall asleep believing you learned tonight. The real mystery of consciousness is strange enough without borrowing a stranger, one that probably is not true. This is why the anesthesia mask is so much more than a medical tool. When the gas takes hold, the easy problems keep humming along for a while. The brain is still there, but the hard problem does something no instrument can follow. The experience goes out, and we can do it 1,000,000 times, put people under and bring them back, reliably, safely, and we still cannot explain, in physical terms, where the experience went in between. We know a great deal about what the drugs do to the cells. A study a few years ago suggested anesthetics work partly by disrupting orderly little clusters of fat molecules in the membranes of your cells, which sets off a chain of signals that shuts conscious processing down. That is a real and useful piece of the mechanism, but notice it explains the machinery going quiet. It does not touch the deeper thing. It does not explain why that machinery running was accompanied by an experience in the first place, or why stopping it takes the experience away. The mechanism and the experience are two different mysteries, and we have only ever really made progress on the first one. Sit with the anesthesia case a moment longer, because it is the cleanest window we have into the whole problem. Every day, all over the world, people lie down and let someone switch off their consciousness on purpose. It is one of the most routine things modern medicine does, and think about what actually happens from the inside. There is no experience of falling asleep, no gradual dimming, no dream. There is the count, 10, 9, 8. And then, from your own point of view, no gap at all, no darkness, because darkness is something you experience, and there was no one there to experience it. The next thing is the recovery room, hours later, and it feels like no time has passed because for you, no time did. You are not unconscious in the way you are unconscious in deep sleep. You were, as far as your own experience is concerned, simply not there, and then you were there again. A person can be switched off and switched back on, and the you that returns feels perfectly continuous with the you that left, as though nothing happened, even though the most important thing that can happen to a mind happened twice. That is the mystery in its purest form, not the chemistry, the gap, the clean, seamless nothing in the middle, where a whole point of view was suspended and then restored, and no instrument we own can tell us anything about what it was like to be in that gap, because being like something is exactly the thing that was gone. We can measure the brain going quiet. We cannot measure the experience going out, because the moment the experience is out, there is no longer any experience there to measure. The thing we most want to study disappears precisely when we most want to look at it. And that, more than anything, is why the hard problem is called hard. It is not that we lack data. It is that the data we want is, by its nature, private, first person and invisible from every angle, except the one angle we can never occupy, which is the inside of someone else. So people have tried to build theories that reach for the second, and the most ambitious of them, the one that pushes furthest into strange territory, is worth understanding because of where it ends up. It is called integrated information theory, and it was developed by a neuroscientist named Giulio Tononi. His starting point is almost mathematical. He proposes that consciousness has to do with how much a system integrates information, how much its parts depend on each other and act as a unified whole rather than as separate pieces working alone. He puts a symbol on it, the Greek letter phi, meant to measure the degree to which a system is more than the sum of its parts. A high phi means a richly integrated system, tightly woven together. And the theory says, roughly, that where there is integration like that, there is experience. Consciousness is not something extra added to the physical system. It just is what integrated information feels like from the inside. Now here is where it gets genuinely startling. The theory sets no flaw. It does not say you need a brain or even a nervous system. It says that any system with any degree of integrated information has some corresponding degree of experience, however faint, and follow that all the way down, and you arrive somewhere most scientists find deeply uncomfortable. You arrive at the idea that experience is not rare at all, that it is woven into the fabric of matter itself, that even very simple physical systems carry some dim, minimal trace of it. This is an old idea with a name, panpsychism. The notion that mind, in some rudimentary form, goes all the way down, that a rock or a proton has some vanishingly small flicker of what you have in enormous abundance. And Tononi has said plainly that he accepts this implication of his own theory. I want to be careful and fair here. This is one of those points where a story like this can slide off the rails. Integrated information theory is one theory among several. It is seriously contested. Many scientists and philosophers think it is unfalsifiable, or that it confuses information integration with actual felt experience, that it measures the wrong thing and calls it consciousness. There are rival theories, respectable ones, that say consciousness is about information being broadcast widely across the brain, or about the brain forming thoughts about its own thoughts. And some of those theories say a rock is exactly as conscious as it looks, which is to say, not at all. There is no consensus. I'm not telling you panpsychism is true. I'm telling you that one of the most serious mathematical attempts to explain consciousness leads a serious scientist to conclude it might be everywhere, and that we cannot currently prove him wrong, and that this is where the honest edge of the science actually is. And notice what that would do to our whole question tonight. If the pessimists are right, minds are the rarest thing in the universe, a near impossible fluke. If Tononi is right, minds are the most common thing there is, a basic feature of matter, and the entire universe is faintly, everywhere, awake. Those are the two most extreme possibilities a person could hold, and the strange, humbling truth is that with what we know right now, we cannot rule out either one. The universe is either almost entirely empty of experience or completely saturated with it, and we are standing in the dark between those two, unable to see which. Here is one small thing integrated information theory can actually do though, and it is quietly moving. Doctors have used it in hospitals. There are patients who have suffered terrible brain injuries, patients who lie in what looks from the outside like a vegetative state, unresponsive, unable to move or speak or signal in any way. And the terrible question hanging over such a patient is whether anyone is still in there, whether the body on the bed is empty, or whether there is a person, fully aware, locked inside, screaming into a silence no one can hear. Researchers took the mathematics of integration and applied it to brain scans of these patients. They estimated, in effect, how integrated each unresponsive brain still was, and in a number of cases the math said someone is still home, in patients who showed no outward sign of it at all. And then, sometimes, those patients recovered enough to tell us, and confirmed it. They had been aware, trapped, but aware. There is an even more direct version of this. You can slide a person who cannot move into a brain scanner and ask them to imagine playing tennis, and then to imagine walking through their house, and you can watch, on the screen, the exact brain regions light up in the exact patterns a healthy person's would, in response to your questions. A silent conversation, conducted entirely through a scanner, with someone the outside world had written off as gone. It is one of the only windows we have ever had into a trapped mind, and it is a small, precious, terrifying thing. Let that sink all the way in, because it is one of the most quietly harrowing facts in modern medicine. There have been people lying in beds, classified as vegetative, treated by everyone around them as though the person was gone and only the body remained, spoken about in the third person while they lay there, and inside the whole time, there was someone, awake, hearing every word, fully present, fully aware and utterly unable to signal it, no way to move a finger or blink on command or make a sound, sealed inside a body that had become a locked room. And the only reason we know this can happen is that a handful of them were reached, through a scanner, asked to think of tennis, and answered. Which means, and this is the part that should stop you, for every one we managed to reach, there is no way to know how many we never did. How many were in there, listening, and were never asked the right question in the right machine, and simply waited, alone, behind a face that could not move. I bring this up not to frighten you, but because it is the sharpest possible illustration of the whole problem. Here, on Earth, in a hospital, is a case where consciousness is definitely present and completely invisible from the outside. Present and undetectable, without a very specific and lucky test. Now scale that up. If we can nearly miss a fully human consciousness lying in a bed a few feet away from us, what chance do we have of detecting experience on a world 1,000 light years off, or in a clump of cells in a jar, or in a mind built by an ocean on a completely different plan than ours? The locked-in patient is the proof, right here at home, that a point of view can exist and leave almost no trace an outsider can read. Experience can be there and be silent, and if it can be silent in the next room, it can certainly be silent across the galaxy. And I want to hand you the vertigo that lives underneath all of this, because it is the real point. There is currently no instrument, and no proposed instrument, that can confirm you yourself are conscious rather than a very convincing philosophical zombie. You know you are conscious, of course, from the inside, but that certainty does not transmit. From the outside, from where I sit, I cannot prove there is anyone home behind your eyes, and you cannot prove it about me, and neither of us can prove it about the octopus, or the injured patient, or an artificial intelligence, or the strangest object of all, which I want to end this part with. In labs right now, scientists grow small clusters of human brain cells from stem cells. They are called brain organoids, and the ones we can grow today are roughly the size of a pea. A pea-sized clump of human neurons, floating in a jar of nutrient fluid, grown from a few starting cells into a tiny knot of the same tissue your own thoughts run on. And here is the thing that keeps ethicists up at night. These organoids fire. They generate spontaneous electrical activity, patterns of it, that in some cases resemble the brainwaves of an early human fetus. Little bursts and rhythms rippling through a pea in a jar, with no eyes, no body, no world to sense, and nobody able to say for certain whether anything at all is home. The mainstream position today is that these organoids are not conscious, that they lack the complexity, and crucially the body and the sensory world, that many theories say experience requires. Some researchers argue forcefully that without a body to inhabit and a world to interact with, a clump of neurons categorically cannot be conscious, no matter how complex, and that the whole worry is misplaced. But other frameworks, integrated information theory among them, cannot so easily rule it out, because they do not require a body, only integration. And so we are in the genuinely unprecedented situation of growing things that might, according to some serious theories, have the faintest flicker of experience, in a jar, on a bench, and having no agreed way to check. No consensus even on which theory to use to ask the question. We might be creating small pockets of experience and switching them off, routinely, and we would have no way to know. That is not science fiction. That is the actual current unresolved state of things. Think about how deep that uncertainty goes, because it is easy to treat it as a clever philosophical toy and miss that it is completely real. Every judgment you have ever made about whether another being is conscious has come from the outside, from behavior, from watching something act the way you would act if you were experiencing what you imagine it experiences. You assume the people around you are conscious because they behave the way a conscious thing behaves, and because they are built like you. And it would be strange and lonely to assume otherwise, and that assumption is almost certainly correct. But notice that it is an assumption. You have never once had direct access to anyone's experience but your own. The only consciousness you have ever actually verified, the only one you can be truly certain exists, is the single one reading these words right now. Everything else, every other mind you believe in, is an inference, A very good inference, but an inference all the same, and that is exactly why the octopus and the injured patient in the scanner and the pea in the jar are all versions of the same problem rather than three separate curiosities. In each case we're standing on the outside of something, holding our instruments, trying to detect a fact, the fact of experience that by its very nature only shows itself from the inside. The instruments can measure activity, they can measure integration and complexity and electrical rhythm. They cannot measure the one thing we most want to know, which is whether any of it is accompanied by a felt point of view, whether there is anyone in there for whom it is like something to be that system. We have built an entire science of the outside of the mind, and the inside, the only part that actually matters for the question of loneliness, remains for now sealed. I told you the thing we understand least is the thing sitting closest to us. This is what I meant. We can describe the birth of the universe. We can weigh a black hole and hear two of them collide 1 billion light years away. And we cannot say for certain whether the pea in the jar feels anything, or whether the person in the next bed is home, or, if we are being truly honest, prove from the outside that you are. The mask goes on, the experience goes out, and the deepest mystery in all of science is not out there among the galaxies. It is the quiet fact that, tonight, for you, the lights are on at all. Which brings us finally back out to the stars and to the silence, and to what that silence might be trying to tell us. For decades now, we have been listening, not metaphorically, actually pointing enormous radio dishes at the sky and listening for any signal that someone else is out there, broadcasting, calling, leaking radio into space the way we do. The most sustained of these efforts has spent about 9 years surveying roughly 1 million nearby stars with a giant radio telescope, a dish more than 300 feet across, sweeping the sky for any whisper of an artificial signal. 1 million stars, 9 years of patient, continuous attention. They even turned the search on nearby galaxies, scanning almost 100 of them for the telltale energy signature of a civilization vast enough to be seen from that far away. And the result, after all of it, is nothing. No signal, no call, no whisper, just the background hiss of the universe itself, the same faint static in every direction, going on and on. There was a moment in 2025 that captures the whole strange effort. An object came into our solar system from outside it. Only the third such interstellar visitor we have ever confidently identified, a piece of another star system passing through ours, detected in July of that year. And a team of researchers swung a whole array of radio dishes, 42 of them, in the high desert of Northern California, around to point directly at this thing as it moved through our neighborhood. They listened, hard, in real time for any sign that it might be more than a rock, any hint of technology, any signal, static, nothing but static. I find that image almost unbearably lonely. 42 dishes, in the desert, all turned toward a single point of light drifting through the dark, straining to hear anyone at all, and hearing only the universe breathing to itself. We have gone back and re-examined old anomalies, old maybe signals from decades past, hunting for something we might have missed. Nothing has held up. The sky, so far, is quiet. I want to give the silence its full weight, because it is easy to hear about a search finding nothing and shrug, as though nothing found means nothing learned. But think about the sheer scale of the attention that has gone into this. 1 million stars, not 1 million objects glanced at. 1 million stars carefully examined for the faintest thread of an artificial signal over 9 years, with some of the most sensitive instruments our species has ever built. And then almost 100 entire galaxies, each one containing its own hundreds of billions of stars, scanned for the kind of vast energy signature a civilization would give off if it had grown large enough to harness the output of many suns. That is not a casual look out the window. That is a species standing on its own small world, cupping its hands to its ears, and listening as hard as it possibly can for as long as it can manage, in every direction it can reach. And the answer keeps coming back the same. Nothing. Not a whisper. Not a single confirmed word from anyone, anywhere, ever. Now that could mean 100 things, and I've already promised you it is not proof of an empty universe, and I meant it. But there is a version of this that is hard to shake once it settles in you. Imagine you are the only person awake in a vast, dark house, and you call out, softly at first, then louder, room after room, night after night, for years. And every time the house answers with the same perfect quiet. At some point the quiet stops feeling like an absence of information. At some point it starts to feel like the house is telling you something. That is roughly where the search for other minds is right now. Decades of calling into the dark, and a stillness so complete it has begun to feel less like waiting for an answer, and more like slowly receiving one. There is one old ghost worth mentioning here, because people always ask about it. Back in 1977, a radio telescope picked up a signal, a strong, narrow burst that lasted just over a minute and then never came again. An astronomer looking at the printout was so struck by it that he circled the reading and wrote a single word in the margin. Wow. And for decades that wow signal has haunted the search, because it looked, for that 1 minute, like exactly the kind of thing you would expect an artificial transmission to look like. People have gone back to it again and again, trying to explain it, trying to catch it repeating, trying to rule out some natural or earthly source. It has never come back. It has never been confirmed as anything. It sits in the record as a single, unrepeated, unexplained minute, which is somehow the most fitting thing the sky has offered us. One tantalizing, maybe, half a century ago, and then silence again. Now there are 100 reasonable explanations for the silence that have nothing to do with loneliness. Maybe they are out there and not broadcasting. Maybe our listening is still absurdly limited, a few decades of a young species pointing a few instruments at a tiny fraction of the sky. Maybe radio is a brief phase and everyone moves on to something we cannot detect. The silence is not proof of an empty universe. I want to be very clear about that. It is not proof of anything. And there is a way of organizing all this uncertainty that scientists have used for decades. A kind of equation that lists everything you would need to know to estimate how many talking civilizations are out there. It multiplies together a chain of factors. How many stars form? How many have planets? How many of those planets could host life? And then the softer, harder factors. How many actually develop life? How many develop intelligence? And a final, haunting one, sometimes just called L, the average length of time a civilization stays able to communicate before it falls silent, whether by collapse or by simply moving beyond radio. And here is the striking thing about that equation as we understand it today. The astronomical factors, the ones about stars and planets, are the ones we have gotten good at measuring. We now know planets are everywhere. It is the biological and social factors, the fraction that develop life, the fraction that develop minds, and that final lifetime L that remain almost totally unknown. Estimates for L alone range from as little as a few hundred years to tens of thousands. We genuinely do not know whether a civilization typically lasts long enough to be heard at all. The unknowns are not in the sky. They are in exactly the two places we have been circling all night: life and mind. But here is what the silence might be, once you set aside the easy excuses. Every year we listen and hear nothing is not neutral. It is a slow, accumulating case file. And there is a framework that takes that silence seriously and asks what it implies, and it is called the Great Filter. The idea is simple and chilling. Somewhere on the long road from lifeless chemistry to a civilization that spreads across a galaxy, there is at least one step that is overwhelmingly, almost impossibly hard. One filter that almost nothing gets through. And the whole question, the question that should keep you up, is where that filter sits. Because there are two possibilities, and they feel very different. Maybe the filter is behind us. Maybe the hard step, the near impossible one, is something we have already passed. The origin of life, or that one-time mitochondrial merger, or the arrival of consciousness itself. In which case we are the rare survivors, the ones who somehow made it through, and the silence is simply the sound of almost nobody else clearing the same wall. That is the hopeful reading in its bleak way. We are precious because we are nearly alone, and the worst is behind us. Or, maybe the filter is ahead of us. Maybe getting to where we are is not actually that hard. Maybe lots of civilizations reach roughly our stage, and then, reliably, something stops them. They destroy themselves, or exhaust their world, or hit some wall we have not reached yet before they ever manage to spread out and be seen. In which case that quiet overhead is not the echo of a path already behind us. It is the sound of a door up ahead that no one ever gets through, and we are walking toward it. And here is a strange twist that follows from the third door, the one about consciousness. If the hard step, the great filter, turns out to be the leap to experience itself, the jump from metabolizing chemistry to a mind that is aware of anything, then that filter is almost certainly behind us. We have already made it. Whatever else is uncertain, you are conscious right now, which means our lineage cleared that particular wall a long time ago. And if that is the wall almost nothing gets through, then finding it behind us is, in its bleak way, the best news we could get. It would mean the worst is over. It would mean we are not walking toward the thing that silences everyone. It would mean we are among the vanishingly few that already passed it. The catch, of course, is that we cannot be sure the filter is that step and not some other one still waiting up ahead. But of all the places the filter could sit, the origin of consciousness is one of the few that we can say, with certainty, we have personally survived. The honest answer is that we cannot yet tell which of those is true. The evidence does not distinguish them. And there is one more speculative model worth mentioning, one that tries to put numbers on how rare the loud, expanding kind of civilization would have to be. It estimates that quiet, self-limiting civilizations would need to outnumber the loud, galaxy-spanning ones by something like 10,000 to 1 for even a single expansionist civilization to have ever arisen in our galaxy. 10,000 quiet worlds for everyone that reaches out. That is a way of expressing just how improbable it might be to get all the way to the stars, even after you have somehow made a mind at all. These are speculative models, built on the thinnest possible data, a sample size of exactly one known biosphere, which is to say ours. Treat them as careful thought experiments, not measurements. But even as thought experiments, they point the same direction. Getting a mind might be hard. Getting a mind that lasts and spreads and calls out might be very nearly impossible, and now bring the whole night together, because here is where the third door leaves us. Suppose the astrobiologists win. Suppose in the next 20 years a probe lands in the snow on Enceladus and finds cells, and another confirms life in the ocean of Europa, and a third turns up microbes in the deep brine of Mars. Life, 3 times over, in our own solar system, the greatest discovery imaginable. Life, it turns out, is common. That would not close the silence. It would sharpen it into something far worse, because it would take away the easy answer. It would prove that the raw material for company is cheap and everywhere, and that would leave only one place for the bottleneck to hide. Not in the origin of life, in the origin of experience, in the leap from a metabolizing ocean to a something that feels its own existence. And the silence overhead would then be telling us, as loudly as silence can, that whatever it takes to make a mind, the universe almost never manages it. That it will grow life on every warm and wet rock it can reach, endlessly, cheaply, and then leave nearly all of it in the dark, unfeeling, unaware, going through the motions of biology with nobody home. A universe full of life and empty of minds. That is the possibility. And it is not a smaller loneliness than an empty cosmos. It is a larger one. Because it means the company was never impossible. The atoms were willing. The chemistry was there. And still, almost everywhere, the light stayed off. And now let me gather up everything we have turned over tonight, gently, because it all points at the same quiet place. We saw that life is tough and hungry and might be almost everywhere. We saw that complex life had to blast through an energy wall that may have taken a 2 billion year accident to breach, an accident that only ever fired once here. We saw that even after all that, intelligence arrived late, right against a closing deadline, on a planet that got lucky with an asteroid it might easily never have gotten. We saw a second kind of mind, the octopus, which either proves minds are easy or proves nothing at all depending on a number we do not have. We saw that we cannot even explain why any of this is accompanied by an experience, cannot prove from the outside that anyone at all is home behind any pair of eyes, cannot count the minds in a single divided skull. And we saw the sky answer our long calling with a silence so total it has started to feel like a reply. Lay all of that side by side, and here is what it might be telling us. Not that the universe is empty, something stranger. That the universe is a place where the raw stuff of company might be cheap and ordinary, and the actual experience of being alive to it might be the rarest event there is. That awareness is not the natural endpoint of a living cosmos, but a near miracle it almost never manages, a flame it lights in one window in 10 billion and lets gutter out everywhere else. We might be wrong about this. I have tried all night to keep showing you the door where we are wrong, and it is a real door, and you should keep it open. But we might also be exactly right, and if we are, then the most precious thing in all of existence is not out there. It is in here. It is the thing reading this. It is you, which is why I want to end where I began, with you. With the plain physical fact of you lying there, taking this in. If the third door is real, if consciousness really is the rare thing, then something has to be said about what you are. And it is not a small thing. You're not one observer among trillions, waiting your turn to be discovered by all the others. You may be one of the very few places in 13.8 billion years across all of this that the universe ever managed to produce a point of view at all. Your ability to lie here and feel something about a sentence like that might be, quite literally, rarer than a supernova, rarer than the collision of two black holes, rarer than a habitable world, the rarest event we know of, happening quietly, right now, behind your eyes, for free, while you are only trying to fall asleep. The astronomer Carl Sagan once said that we are a way for the cosmos to know itself. He meant it as wonder, and it is wonder. But tonight I think it is also a responsibility, and almost a kind of grief, because if he was right, then all of this, the whole vast dark machinery of stars and moons and oceans, spent 13 billion years and produced, in a handful of places, maybe only one, a small window through which it could finally look back at itself and understand even a little of what it is. And you are one of those windows, open, right now, looking. The window does not stay open forever. One day your particular arrangement of matter will stop, the way that person under the mask stopped, and that specific view, the one that is only yours, may never open again anywhere, for anyone, for the rest of time. That is not a reason to be afraid. It is a reason to notice. You are the universe, briefly awake and aware that it is awake, which is the rarest thing it has ever done. So let the stars be silent tonight. Let the oceans of Europa keep their secret. You do not need them to answer. The light is on in here. That is enough. Sleep well.